In these uncertain economic times, it's easy to be worried about protecting your wealth, your hard-earned savings, and your family's financial future. Plunging interest rates, the devaluating dollar, and political unrest constantly threaten what you have worked hard to earn and all that you own. That's why now it's more important than ever to protect your assets and have the money you need to make your dreams come true. Welcome to the Global Wealth Fortress Report with successful global entrepreneur and wealth preservation expert Joel Nagel. Joel's helped thousands of people just like you protect what you have so that you can make even more and make your every dream come true. So, sit back and enjoy Joel Nagel's offshore expert advice on how you can live the good life at a great price, where the sun never sets on your financial fortress.
Hello, this is Carib Carter-Clues, and welcome to Joel Nagel's Global Wealth Fortress Report. This is the ultimate report on offshore assets because Joel Nagel is America's #1 asset protection attorney. So, Joel, welcome.
Thank you, Carter. It's good to have you back. I know we missed you on the show last week.
Thank you. I am back up and around. Thank God. And so it's just thrilled to be back with you because, you know, I was saying to our super producer, Gary, before we went on, the advantage we have at the Offshore Club is there are other offshore organizations out there. I'm not going to name any because we're friends with a lot of those people, but none of them have. And they talk about offshore assets, offshore, where to put your money, what to do. Nobody has what we have, and that's Joel Nagel. I mean, for the rest of them, they go out and get articles from other people. We have the real article, you. So it's fantastic.
Well, thank you for that. That's very kind. I mean, this is the 33rd year that I've been in this business. And, you know, a lot of things that we talk about are legal in nature, but others are just practical, right? You know, which banks treat you nicely. That's not a legal issue, but, you know, that's the kind of experience you gain from just being in this business so long. You know, I see that the folks that come and go, and then the ones that, you know, have staying power in the industry. And so a lot of the people I work with, you know, I tell clients, you know, my Rolodex is your Rolodex. Honestly, I don't take commissions or finder's fees or anything like that. If I'm working with a client and they need, you know, a banker, a broker, a gold vault, whatever it is they need, you know, if we have that information, we gladly, you know, connect the people. They can decide for themselves. But, you know, I'm not going to introduce you to somebody that I haven't interfaced with for, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20, some cases 30 years. I mean, I've, you know, like the check-ins, for example, I met Michael Check-in literally the first week I opened my law firm. So, you know, I've been at this 33 years. I've known them 33 years. And, you know, so when I introduce people to folks like that, you know, it does come with the good housekeeping seal of approval because, you know, I'm not going to recommend my clients to any fly-by-nights, but
which is just fantastic. And the fact of the matter is, there is not another podcast on the internet that can touch the Global Wealth Fortress Report for the amount of expertise, and it's because of you. I mean, it's certainly not because of me. You know, I have 2 assets offshore, 2 homes in Honduras. That's it.
Well, we're always glad you always think of the best things to talk about. So I'm always glad to chat with you. And I have spoken and written for a number of the other publications. But like you said, we're doing this now regularly for the Offshore Club every week. And, you know, it's nice because if we don't talk about something this week, you know, we know we're going to talk about it next week. It's sort of the, you know, Arabian Nights, the story that never ends, because that's really what this is. This is about your business, your investments. It's really about your life. So, you know, we always have more things to talk about.
Which is fantastic. And I know now you are, every time we talk to you, you're in a different country. As a matter of fact, I think once in the past 3 months, you've actually been in Pennsylvania. Every other time it's somewhere else that I wish I were. But you're in Switzerland now, correct?
Yeah, I'm in the financial hub of Switzerland, which is Zurich, Switzerland, in the northern part of Switzerland. It's not far from Germany. It's not far from Austria. It's not far from Liechtenstein, which is, you know, the little principality, and it's on the border between Switzerland and Austria. And, with my family background being Germanic, I've always been sort of pulled in this direction. I have a lot of clients. We find a lot of solutions for clients, particularly banking solutions in this part of the world. So actually, I'm here for that. I'm also here because Switzerland's become, sort of at the forefront in the crypto industry. So I have a lot of meetings here yesterday, today, tomorrow, and then I'll get on a plane and fly over to Austria. So next week we can talk from there. But this week I'm here in Zurich.
That's great. And I think, there is I want to talk to you today. And this is something, look, we have 100,000 members, okay? And I think a lot of them are going to be interested in a topic that you're an expert on, and you're in the country that it's all about, and that's Swiss bank accounts, okay? Swiss bank accounts. I say there are three questions. I would imagine we have thousands of members. I know we do, who have the kind of wealth that they really should be seriously interested in opening a Swiss bank account. But we have a lot like me too, who one day I would love to have that kind of money, but even if I don't, all my life I've heard about Swiss bank accounts, and I wonder, what is a Swiss bank account? Why do people open them, and who should be opening them, and what are other and who should look for other alternatives? And we have a lot of young people too. I'd say, according to the analysis I've seen, like 30% of our of the members of the Offshore Club now are under 40. So some of them someday, they're good, especially if they follow your advice and Mike Cobb's investment report advice, may end up with the money to do Swiss bank account. So let's talk about Swiss bank accounts from somebody who knows them inside and out. First of all, what is a Swiss bank account? How's it different from my Wells Fargo account?
Yeah, I think that, to take a step back, a lot of people, when they think about Switzerland, the things that come to their mind, Swiss banking is it's always right there in the top five, maybe along with Swiss chocolates and Swiss cheese and,
Right.
the mountains and yodeling and Heidi and those types of things. But, Switzerland, the reason it's been a historic banking and tax haven is because, quite honestly, it's been a independent, neutral country. There hasn't been a war here in 500 years, and not World War II. Hitler never invaded. Not World War One. Not any of the wars that were touching Western Europe and devastating it. And the Swiss figured out, hey, by completely staying neutral all the time, protecting the wealth of people who put their money here, more people are going to put their money here because, the old saying, capital flows to where it's treated best. And Switzerland has always been one of those places. They've never taxed, interest or investment income of foreigners who put their money in Switzerland. There's no VAT tax on purchasing things like gold, and so they make it very friendly for people to want to use Switzerland as a platform. And the reason I say platform is, look, there's lots of ways that you can invest around the world, you can save around the world, but think of Switzerland as a very private platform where you can store your money safely. There's the chances of there being insurrection, warfare, things like that are going to attack or take your money or confiscate it. Those types of things just aren't going to happen here in Switzerland. So that's kind of the background as to why Switzerland, sort of generically. Banking, they've always had a very high level of service when it comes to banks. And, banking was never regulated to just savings and checking accounts the way you would think of a bank account. Switzerland always viewed a bank account as a tool to manage your wealth. So if you wanted to, save money, great. If you needed to transfer money, great. But if you wanted to buy stocks and bonds and mutual funds, that's fine too. If you wanted to buy and store gold, great. If you needed a private wealth manager to take care of your money for you, great. In other words, their platform has always been very private, very secure, and very flexible. And I think that's what's always attracted people. I just mentioned a few minutes ago that now they're really at the forefront in the whole crypto space. You have some countries saying, we don't want crypto. You have other countries saying, well, we don't really care about crypto. Switzerland's taking a classic Swiss approach, which is saying, hey, we want this industry. We know clients want it, but we're going to regulate it. We're going to make sure it's clean. We don't want bitcoins or other currencies coming in here from the dark web or adult entertainment or
Right.
organized crime or anything like that. So they've instituted regulations where the coins themselves go through a mechanism to check, where they came from, what their origin was, to make sure that it's clean. And I think that's how Switzerland has been able to, stay relevant in this world where maybe other jurisdictions in the offshore banking space haven't really, stayed relevant.
Well, okay. A question that comes to my mind from what you just said about they check it out, they make sure it doesn't come from here, doesn't come from there. One of the things I always heard that was a big plus for Swiss bank accounts is the privacy that you couldn't have a bunch of outside organizations, people, or governments like the US come in and just devastate your bank account and demand a bunch of private information. Is it still that way? Is it an advantage, and to what extent?
Well, it's a great question. Look, when I started my career back in the late 80s, you still had things like numbered accounts. That meant you could come in, you could plop down a satchel of cash, you could come up with a code word, and they would hand you a passbook that had a number on it, no names. And it was impossible for them to give your information away because they didn't actually even have your information. In the early 90s, the Basel Accord, which was an international global banking, basically the banks and the governments of the world came together and said, well, this can't really carry on because it just opens the door for corruption, crime, all those types of things that people didn't want. So they agreed to do away with numbered accounts, but you still had what was called bank secrecy. And bank secrecy meant that the bank had your information, but they didn't share that information with anyone else.
Okay.
That's still largely the case, but there have been some inroads in bank secrecy, particularly when it comes to the tax authorities. So, for example, the Swiss banks here are compliant with what's called FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act that came into effect. It was introduced by President Obama in 2010. It was really in effect, by around 2014, and it requires banks to disclose information about U.S. persons where where there's questions about the activity of U.S. persons, and if the banks don't comply, the U.S. makes it very, very difficult for them to function in the global marketplace, particularly in transacting dollars. They basically put up a toll gate where when they try to do transactions, 30% of the gross amount gets caught up in withholding. So, no bank is going to do that. So the Swiss banks either went in one of two directions. They either got rid of their American clients and complied that way, or they, made the client sign a statement that they could disclose under certain circumstances their information to the US IRS. So if you want to come here and open a bank account now, you have to fill out certain US IRS forms as part of the Swiss bank account opening process. You're going to fill out a W-8 form, things like that. But still, keep this in mind. The bank privacy, this is an exception to banks' privacy when it comes to providing information about tax. That doesn't mean that the U.S. government can come in and swoop in and take your money. It also doesn't mean that disclosure applies to anyone else. So if you have ex-spouses, ex-partners, you're in a fight with somebody, litigation, whatever, they're not going to be able to come in and grab your information. So when people ask me, is bank secrecy still, in effect in Switzerland, I say, well, it depends. Secret from whom? For most people, bank secrecy is still in effect. It's client bank, bank client. That's it. But the caveat is, in opening the account, you've agreed that the Swiss bank can provide, in certain circumstances, the information to the U.S. Treasury Department, namely the IRS. But that's as far as it goes. It's not about disclosing that information in lawsuits or in divorces or in any of the other millions of things that can happen to people, to where they would in the U.S. it would be very, very easy to basically subpoena that information from a U.S. bank, and in Switzerland, it's still virtually impossible. So, I would say, bank privacy is still in effect, but in a qualified manner, and doesn't include, the U.S. government for tax purposes.
Okay, so in terms of protecting the privacy of your money, you open up a Swiss bank account, and you can put, I'm just going to use a figure, $1 million in there, and you know that some fruitcake who decides to sue you and take everything you have cannot go raid. They can't go to the Switzerland and say to that bank and say, we want to know every penny he has in your bank. They may suspect there's money there, but that Swiss bank can say no.
Well, the Swiss bank's not even going to disclose whether, if you were suing me and you had some inclination that I had money at, Deutsche Bank or Swiss Bank or, any of the banks here, if you went to the bank, they would just flatly say, well, we're not even going to comment whether Mr. Nagel's a client, because that disclosure itself would violate bank privacy. So yeah, they're not going to give you that information. The other thing, keep in mind that, whereas the U.S. government has just been printing for the last, forever, that's not the case here in Switzerland. They have conservative monetary policy. They used to be backed 100% by gold. That gold connection they've had to lessen it because the Swiss currency has become so strong that they've lessened it down, 80%, 50%, 40%, to where, it's not 100% backed by gold, but there's still a connection to gold. And what that connection means is the Swiss government can't just go out and print money anytime it wants. So that also means that over time, the value of the Swiss franc has steadily gone up. Not on any given day, it goes up and down just like other currencies. But for example, when I was in college, if you want to go back, 35 years ago, it was 5 Swiss francs to the dollar. And, it steadily went down from 5 to 4.5 to 4 to 3.5, 3, 2, 1. Now it's inverted to where it's $1.1 to 1 Swiss franc. So, if you had placed any number you want, to use your example, $1 million in a Swiss bank account 35 years ago, and they paid you 0 interest,
right?
Your million Swiss francs, would now be worth around $5 million. So, when you look at it that way, you don't even have to make investments here. It's just a good way to protect the value you already have by converting a portion of your portfolio into Swiss francs. And that's really one of the main reasons why, forget about privacy, forget about all that stuff. People say, I disclose my bank account to the IRS. I tell them it's there. Maybe they're in, Swiss government bonds making 2%, but they don't really care. They want to be in something where the currency itself is going to hold its value. And the Swiss franc has historically done that.
That's fantastic. So since 1913, when the Fed started printing money willy-nilly, the value U.S. dollars dropped 97%. You're saying exactly. The value of the Swiss franc over the past 35 years has gone up a multiple of...
Yeah, actually, one of my gold friends would tell you the correct way to say it is the Swiss franc's gone down too. It just hasn't gone down as quickly as the U.S. dollar. Meaning, remember, before it was pegged 1-to-1, the gold to Swiss, and now it's not. It's only a fractional peg, but still it still exists. So the value of the Swiss franc has gone down. The value of the U.S. dollar has gone down faster, which makes it appear as though the Swiss franc has gone up against it. And if you just compare, Swiss francs and dollars, it has. But if you introduce, for example, gold into the equation, as the measuring stick, you would see that they're actually both down. Just Switzerland's down less than the Swiss franc's down less than the U.S. dollar.
And $1 million put in a Swiss bank account 35 years ago would be $5 million now, just on the value of their currency.
Yeah, if you 35 years ago you put $1 million in, you would have had 5 million Swiss francs. And, now that 5 million Swiss francs would actually be worth about $6 million. So it would be up 600%, which is by doing nothing, just sitting
which is
there.
Fantastic. All right. Well, almost out of time here. So let's close on one other item.
Sure. Happy to comment.
For average folks. So for millionaires, everything you've said, folks, you've heard it. If you're one of our many members who is a millionaire, go to nagellaw.com and talk about a Swiss bank account. Nagellaw.com. There it is. Talk about a Swiss bank account. How about for folks who, a guy like me, if I wanted to put $100,000 in a Swiss bank account, the bank would probably say no, right? It's just that simple. Is that?
Well, I understand where you're going with that question. And yes, a lot of the private Swiss banks, because of U.S. compliance, because of the level of the talent, the banking talent they need to put on an account, you know, their minimums are higher. They might be several hundred thousand or even $1 million. But if you're just trying to access the Swiss franc, for example, you know, a number of the Caribbean banks, I know you've talked to, you know, people like, for example, Belize, where they have positions in the Swiss franc. In other words, you're sort of banking with them. They're turning around and as an institution banking with a Swiss institution. That's a way that you can, you know, open up an account and have access. Maybe if you only have, you know, a couple $1,000s, you don't need to have hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. So that's what I would do. I would look at some of the banks that you talk about in other episodes, and I would contact the bankers and I would say, hey, can I have access to the Swiss franc for your bank? And in most cases, a lot of the good offshore banks will say yes to that. So that would be my hack or my workaround.
That's fantastic. That's great. And our signal's breaking at the perfect time because we just finished up. So this is great. And Joel, thank you. This has been fantastic. For those who have the kind of money to do a Swiss bank account, now you know what to do and do it. Just talk to Joel at nagellaw.com. For those who don't, the Belize option, fantastic. Joel, thank you, sir. Have fun in Switzerland. And next week, we'll see you in Austria.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, folks. Excellent. That is information you cannot get elsewhere. Only on Joel Nagel's Global Wealth Fortress Report at offshore.club. So fantastic. Make sure to subscribe so you can make sure you don't miss any. And we'll be back next week with Joel from Austria. So as I always tell you, let's do this thing.